There we go.
No, I want to backtrack a bit because earlier I couldn't remember the name of my mother's father's brother, my grandfather's brother. It was Michael. I should remember that. It was Michael, who was the younger brother who lived right next door to my grandfather, and who was the junior, very fine, a very nice man. That grandfather had a couple of other brothers. One was Joseph, who lived in New York, who used to visit occasionally. And the other's name was Peter, and he lived in Danbury. The one thing also which I failed to mention with regard to that grandfather, every year at Labor Day, we got in the car with my grandfather and we visited Poughkeepsie, New York, just across the Hudson River, where he had what he called a cousin. But people from Central Europe in those days, if you came from the same village, you called people a cousin. They may indeed have been cousins, but usually they weren't. They simply came from the same village. And this was a woman who was a widow. She was a marvelous, wonderful woman. She owned a store, and a corner store, grocery store, and I used to love to go there because she would let me wait on people at the ice cream counter, giving out ice cream cones for 5 cents. And I used to love nothing better than standing behind that ice cream freezer and scooping out the ice cream, putting it in a cone, and giving it to somebody for a nickel. And at the end of our visit, usually a 2-day visit, she lived in an apartment above the store. She would give us gifts. It was the Labor Day, school was to begin the next week. And so she would give us a box of pencils and a box of Hershey bars. And oh, that was wonderful to get a whole box of Hershey bars and a box of pencils and go back to school with that. She wasn't particularly a rich woman. On the contrary, she was such a kind and generous woman. She would give things away to poor people who came in. But she was a wonderful woman. And among other things, she had 2 daughters who were very well educated. They were school teachers, and we became quite friendly with them. And we used to urge our grandfather, why don't you marry this woman? She was so wonderful, but my grandfather just could not.
Oh, that was in the period when he was a widower and
He
she was a widow.
Because he was a widower from a very early age and she was a widow. We said, why don't you marry her? She's such a wonderful woman. No, he was unthinkable that he would marry again, but...
So he would just call on her? It wasn't like there wasn't a relationship there or anything?
No relationship, whatever. And he would only go when we went with him. Only on Labor Day, that's all. Every Labor Day we went. And usually on the way we would go cross the Bear Mountain Bridge. That was a famous tourist resort at that time. You crossed the Hudson River on the Bear Mountain Bridge, and we'd visit West Point, which was the U.S. Military Academy. And we watched the cadets on parade. That was a standard Labor Day treat, visiting the cousin and crossing Bear Mountain Bridge and watching the West Point cadets on parade. To go back to my sister was 5 years younger than I. Her name was Barbara, a very nice girl. She became a dental hygienist, and I think we better close the door. Don't you think?
Yeah, I think it's fine. Actually, I'll close this door.
Yeah, close it. It'll still come through the windows, but
yeah, you probably can't hear it very much.
So she was a dental hygienist, and she married a man who was then in the Navy, a sailor, who got out of the Navy and became an electrical engineer, and had some very good positions with some engineering firms. He went to Indiana Institute of Electrical Engineering, actually. I attended his graduation. He was a very nice fellow by the name of John Hancock, same name as the first signer of the Declaration of Independence, John Hancock. And they settled in Toledo, Ohio. He was on the road much of the time. He used to come here to North Carolina, where he would supervise the installation of electrical furnaces in big factories. Not home furnaces, but great big electrical ones in factories. And he died at a fairly early age and left her a widow, but she's quite well off. And they have three very nice children. The oldest one, Greg, is in California, married to a school teacher, went to the University of Toledo, and while he did not specialize in computers, nevertheless pulled himself up by the bootstraps and is now manager of all the computer activities for the Fluor Construction Company, which is the largest construction company in the United States. The other son, Doug, lives in Toledo, and not quite sure what he does. He has two children. The first son doesn't have any children. And then they have a daughter, Pamela, who is a medical secretary, who doesn't have any children and won't have any children either. So they're a very nice family in Toledo. My sister has visited us here, and she may visit us again this year. So that takes care of our family. My mother, for a while, I should add, after the death of my father, my mother could no longer live alone. My sister went out. My sister's a very assertive kind of person, shall I say, and she went out and thought my mother should move in with her. So my mother sold her house and went to Toledo and lived with my sister in a rather small house. And it's not very easy for two women to live together in a small house. And eventually my mother had to go to a rest home, which was very sad. Probably the saddest experience in my life. Really the saddest, not necessarily the most traumatic, but the saddest was when I used to visit her in the rest home, and she would plead with me to get her out of there and so on. But she was in such condition that nobody could take care of her. She had to be taken care of in a rest home. And she died at the venerable age of 92. Her heart was in perfect condition, but she had such severe arthritis that she died of that at 92 years of age. So I should...
All right, so we lost a little bit there of having the battery and the camera ran out, but I think you were at the point where your sister, or your mother had died at 92 years of the severe arthritis. And I think we were talking about how most of your family died at an older age.
Mm-hmm. That's also true of your grandmother's family, Michael, all of whom lived to a venerable age in their late 80s. And as I've indicated, that's important for you and for your children, Lilia and others, to know, because to a large extent their own longevity is determined by the genes and the longevity patterns of their ancestors. That's why in all medical histories, one of the first questions which the doctor asks you is, how old were your parents when they died? How old were your grandparents when they died? That's an important factor in the medical history. Now we got through our junior high school days in 7th and 8th grades. I especially loved Latin and French. We had Latin in 7th and 8th grades, and we had French in 7th and 8th grades, and I love those languages and still do. I have a great love for languages generally, and for words, and for grammar, and so on. High school, I should make another observation. All of our elementary school teachers through the 8th grade virtually all of them were Irish Catholic. And of course they were not married. They were what we call spinsters. School boards were not allowed to hire married women as teachers. The reasoning being that if they did, they would take jobs away from men who had to support their families. And there were virtually no other opportunities for women anyhow. Very few women went into engineering or law or medicine. Virtually the only professions open to women were teaching, being a secretary, or being a milliner making hats, or being a clerk in a store. So the result was that the school teachers we got were really first-class people. They were not the dregs of they were all excellent people. In the elementary schools, they were Irish Catholic, daughters of new immigrants, of Irish immigrants, who had gone to a normal school for 2 years to become certified as teachers, and they were wonderful. Every one of them had an Irish name: Delia, Kane, Kilcoyne, McLaughlin, and so on. But they were superb, and they were dedicated. They were not married. Their whole life centered around the school, quite unlike the situation now. When we got to high school, the situation changed. In high school, the teachers were Protestant for the most part. They were graduates of four-year liberal arts colleges in our part of the country of New England, largely Vassar, Mount Holyoke, Wellesley, all of the good women's colleges. In some cases from some of the state teachers' colleges in New York, Albany State Teachers College, and so on. So you had a different type of person. Again, they were spinsters, unmarried, very few men. In high school, we had the principal was a man, the vice principal was a man, chemistry teacher, coach, one English teacher, one history teacher were men, all the other were women. But once again, every one of them, in their peculiar ways, were first-rate teachers and people, and they were dedicated to teaching. The men, of course, were married. The women, as I said, were not, because you could not hire a married woman as a teacher. I liked high school very much. I especially liked English and history. One interesting story I have to tell, when I was in junior high school, let's go back to that, I had a friend, as I indicated a bit earlier, whose name was Truman Warner. He was a very good friend of mine. He was a better student than I was, in the sense that he got all A's. He was what I would later on in my own teaching career would call a kind of, well, I forgot now the designation which I used, but the kind of person who studied and all the time and did only that. And he was the kind of person who was what the enemies of Al Gore used to accuse Al Gore of being, the kind of person who on Friday afternoon, when the classes were ending, would raise his hand and say, "But teacher, you forgot to assign us our weekend homework." He was that kind of a fellow, not particularly well liked. He wasn't, so. But anyhow, there was a contest, an oratorical contest, sponsored by the Daughters of the American Revolution. And he participated, and I participated. We had to memorize a famous speech, like the Gettysburg Address or something like that. And then we had to deliver this before the judges of the Daughters of the American Revolution. Well, he won first prize, and I won second prize. Though I think I did a better job and my speech was better, but anyhow, he won first prize. I often thought maybe it was because his name was Warner, and this was the Daughters of the American Revolution, and I didn't have that kind of name. But anyhow, I give him credit, he probably deserved it. Later on, we went to college together. We graduated together. He became a elementary school teacher. I became a college professor. He went back to the college and became a dean and a professor. He got a Doctor of Education degree from Columbia by going part-time and going summers and so on. And when I got my honorary degree from Western Connecticut State University, he was also retiring from the college. And they were giving him a medal for distinguished service to the college. At the same time, they were giving me an honorary degree, so we were both being honored, being graduated from the same class. I kept in mind Truman Warner in 8th grade won the first prize and I won the second prize. Now I was getting the first prize and an honorary degree. But they invited him also to make a few remarks. They told me on the time, when I said, "Well, how long will he speak on the telephone?" He said, "Oh, he'll speak for just a few minutes." And I was supposed to speak for half an hour. So he got up and he spoke for half an hour first. Well, now you know at a commencement, nobody wants to listen to two speeches. not to mention one. I mean, so he really put me in a bind. He spoke for half an hour. He stole my thunder, really. He spoke, and then I came on. Well, I shortened my speech. I cut it in half because I realized the students didn't want to hear a full speech after listening to him. Though he gave a good speech, by the way. But it was on local things about the college and so on, wherein mine was on world affairs. So I thought afterward to myself, he won the first prize in the oratorical contest in 8th grade, and he really won first prize at the commencement by stealing my thunder and giving a speech when he shouldn't have given a speech. So I thought that was amusing. I didn't hold it against him. He was a strange fellow. He died about a year ago, a bachelor, never married. But anyhow, I thought that was interesting. But he was my friend throughout school and through college. The other observation about high school, I don't have much else to say except the teachers were fine. Teachers were very good. I walked to school every day. It was about 2 miles, about a 2-mile walk. And I had a lot of good friends.
Was the high school in the same? Did you have to switch buildings from junior high school to high school?
The 2 separate buildings in 2 different parts of town, actually.
And how many students were in the high school?
High school was quite large as high schools went in those days. I suppose 1,000 students.
Was it a public high school?
Yes, it was a public high school, yeah.
What was the high school called?
Called Danbury High School.
Danbury High School.
It was a good high school. People came to that school from surrounding areas which were too small to have high schools of their own, such as Fairfield, Reading, and Bethel, and so on. They came to the Danbury High School. It was a good school. They had a good faculty.
There were no buses. You had to walk. You
had to walk.
The
only buses used at that time were people who lived way out in the country. I mean, way out, many miles out, and buses would bring them in. Otherwise, to walk 2 or 3 or 4 miles, you had to do that. You had to walk.
I guess the schools would have been, at that time, it was basically all white people.
Yes, let me comment on that. Elementary school. That's a good question you raise. Elementary school, entirely white. A few Jewish students. My best friend was a Jewish student, Emmett Bonger. Later became a professor of drama at one of the colleges, small college in Ohio. He was a very dear friend of mine. And we usually walked to school together. He'd usually stop at my house, sometimes have a cup of coffee or something on his way, and we'd go on to school together. And we used to talk big things about religion and about what does death mean and where do you go after death and so on. I knew he was Jewish, but we never had any, we just didn't think in terms of Jewishness or non-Jewishness or anything of the kind. We palled around together. There were no blacks. At Danbury at the time, there were perhaps 3 or 4 black families. One of them was an auto mechanic, and I remember my father taking his car to him as an auto mechanic, and that's the only time I encountered a black worker, actually. In high school, there were no blacks. Absolutely none. And the percentage of Jewish increased in high school somewhat. There were, to the best of my recollection, in elementary and junior high, no Jewish teachers. In high school, to the best of my knowledge, no Jewish teachers at all. There was one teacher who taught music of Arab descent from Lebanon, but he changed his name. He was of Arab descent. At that time, several of the Jewish students changed their names somewhat. That was common, as you know, during the war, for American Jews to change their name. Sometimes they even changed their religion, such as Barry Goldwater, the well-known Republican conservative senator from Arizona, whose name was Goldweiser, changed the name to Goldwater and became an Episcopalian. some of the Jews didn't go that far. They just changed the name and kind of hid out. One of my best friends, for example, whose name was Rosen, R-O-S-E-N, but he added an I to the name, changed it to Rosien, R-O-S-I-E-N, and went briefly to the Congregational Church and established himself as a Protestant. They were actually Jews. Later, after the establishment of Israel, I don't know whether you're aware of this, when the threat of Hitlerism was gone, then these people reverted very often to the Jewish name. In the case of my friend, he died recently. You'll see when he died, his name was Rosen, R-O-S-E-N. But when I knew him, it was Rosien. This was quite common. Jews were scared to death, you see, during this time. Jews even in the United States, because for a while it looked as though Hitler was going to win the war. And he would do the same thing to Jews in the States that he had done to them in Europe. So it was an interesting phenomenon to watch. By and large, however, I'm mentioning the Jewishness now because I'm aware of it now. But I wasn't aware of it then. I really didn't. I look at this in retrospect. At the time, I wasn't aware of it. It didn't mean anything to me. I really wasn't. I was aware of who was Jewish, yes, just as you were aware of who was a Protestant or who was a Catholic, because those things were important in those days, as they're not important now. But I wasn't. It was not at the forefront of my thinking by any means.
So you would have been entering high school, what, ninth grade? You would have been.
I entered high school. Let's see. I graduated from high
16,
school
15?
in 1937. So I entered high school then in 1933, when I was 13 years old.
Really? That's a pretty young age for
Yeah.
for entering high school.
I think that would be the case. Let's see, I entered college in 1937. Yes, I graduated from high school in 1937.
Oh, okay, yeah, so you would have been 17, which is, some people are 17, some people are 18. That seems about right.
So I was 17 when I graduated, yeah. I think I skipped a grade. They skipped me a grade in elementary school. I've forgotten which grade now, but I skipped a grade.
How did they do high school in those days? Because I know here there's been sort of a movement to make high school more like college, where maybe you have a little bit of free time and you switch classrooms for which subject you go to, and you have a different, for example, high school now you might have 7 periods where you have classes, 6 of which you actually have classes, and you switch to 6 different rooms with 6 different teachers, and then have maybe one period free. At least this was the case with me. How did you have one teacher for multiple subjects? Did you switch rooms, or
we started that actually in junior high school. In the 7th and 8th grades, we changed rooms, and they were specialists, and we changed rooms. Yes, and we had in junior high school we had geography, history, arithmetic, penmanship. Penmanship was very important. We had to learn the Palmer method, and you had to have your wrist had to be perfectly even, and the teacher would come and balance a quarter on your wrist, and if that quarter fell off, you failed. That wrist had to be perfectly even as you practice the Palmer method of writing. The Palmer method, if done properly, is beautiful, absolutely beautiful writing. Yes, we changed in 7th and 8th grade. We changed the subjects, but we did not have yes, we had a study period. We had a study period up in the auditorium. It was not a free period, that is, you couldn't go out and shoot cocaine or whatever they call it, but you had to go in the auditorium to study, and there was a teacher up there supervising and seeing to it that you kept quiet. She usually had a ruler. You had to be quiet. In high school, it was the same thing. Of course, we switched classrooms, and the teachers were specialists, and we had one study period a day. And that study, we had a great big study hall, as it was called, and there were 2 or 3 teachers constantly roaming up and down the aisles, seeing to it that you studied.
did you get to select any classes, or was it
Yes.
all predetermined for you? Would select them?
Some was predetermined, but there were some electives, yeah.
Hmm.
For example, there was like a science core. Well, I chose biology. Lucy chose chemistry when she took it, but I chose biology. So yes, you did have some choice.
Was the building sort of like a big enclosed sort of bureaucratic building where it felt? I mean, what was the feeling inside of the school? Was it? 'Cause I remember being in public school where it was more like a big, you know, almost like a big government building where you had the feeling of sort of this bureaucracy of government. Whereas switching to a private school, it was a little bit more of a.
Yeah.
I was just curious what the.
No, it was a
like.
big building. Looked like a government building, and bells rang at the ending the period, and you then went on to the next class. Teachers stood on duty in the hallways, standing there usually with their arms folded.
Was there a cafeteria?
There was a cafeteria. You could either bring your lunch or buy it or combine both. I think I usually brought mine, as I recall, and then I bought some. I bought chocolate milk or something like that. Usually, bringing lunch was much better than the lunch which you got there. Yes, there was a cafeteria, a big cafeteria, run by a special woman who was in charge of that.
What did they do? Were there any sort of antics or class clown activities or sort of standard punishments that might seem a little interesting in this day? I don't know if they would hit you with a ruler or what they would, if they would do anything that nowadays would be considered taboo or.
Well, let's go back to elementary school. In elementary school, you could be punished with a razor strap, you know, a leather strap on the palm of your hands. And I have seen that done, actually. And in one case with a Miss Bunnell, with a student who was one of these bullies I told you about last time, who was particularly mischievous. And I remember up in front of the room, Miss Bunnell had a stick, a pointer, and she was actually struggling with this boy, actually fighting with him, with the stick. And that was permissible. There was nothing wrong with that then. Now, of course, you'd be sued. But it was permissible then. In high school, that kind of thing didn't go on. I don't remember any. But then I wasn't in on any of the. There were kind of more or less rough, some ruffian kind of boys. I wasn't in with them, so I just don't. But I can't remember anything. The only punishment would be stay after school. Stay after school. Something like that.
Now, were there activities, sort of extracurricular
There
clubs
were
and things for after school?
There was a stamp club. I was president of the stamp club, and we met after school. There was a music club. There was a chemistry club. There were a cappella choir. There were sororities for girls. Lucy was a member of a sorority. There was a glee club for boys. I was in the glee club. And yes, there were all kinds of activities, which went on. Not as many as I suspect as there are now, but there were quite a few activities. There were teams. There were athletic teams: football, basketball. No soccer. Football and basketball, and swimming, and golf. Swimming, golf, football, and basketball. Soccer, lacrosse didn't become popular, I suspect, until your generation, or at least after my generation. They were not popular in my time. Or hockey.
So, what kind of time would you spend in these clubs? Was it a daily after school thing or a weekly thing?
No, not weekly. It was weekly, and there had to be a teacher, a faculty supervisor. So I went back at night. I think it was once a week, possibly once a month. We had our biology teacher, who was a wonderful woman. Sometimes I would meet her. She lived on Main Street, and I would meet her on the corner, and we'd walk to the school together. And she was the faculty advisor. A teacher had to be present at night. So I think it was probably once a month rather than once a week. And the teacher simply donated her time. She didn't get any extra pay for that. So that was very nice of her.
How did they structure the high? Did you have, like they have now, where you have two 2 semesters and then 3 months off in summer, or how would they?
Yes, there were 2 semesters and 3 and the summer off. There was no other arrangement. That was the standard arrangement for all schools at that time.
And did they have, so you would get a report card every semester, or a report card each quarter?
To go back to elementary school, yes, you got a report card at the end of each year, and if you failed, your report card was green. You got a green card. And so we used to go to school in fear and trembling as to who's going to get a green card, although we knew pretty much from our grades. And you got left back. People were left back, that's all. There was no such thing as social promotion. It was unheard of. If your grades didn't muster up, you got a green card and you had to repeat the grade. Same thing was true in high school. Except in high school, it wasn't a case of repeating the grade. It was a case because you weren't. It was a case rather of repeating the course. And I failed geometry, I'm ashamed to say, so I had to repeat the course by being tutored in geometry. I excelled in everything else, but not in geometry. So,
So now when you got your report, did they send the report card to your parents, or would they give it to you and you take it home to your parents?
They gave it to us. They gave it to us and we took it to our parents, and the parents had to sign it. Now there were some instances known of kids signing their parents' name, but teachers caught up with them eventually.
So what kind of involvement did your parents have in your, did they watch your report card, or did they make sure you did your homework, or did they, what kind of involvement did they have as far as?
Yes, they certainly made sure we did our homework. They were checking on that at home. They signed the report card, and we certainly were admonished. On the other hand, when I failed geometry, my parents were very sympathetic. They very gladly paid for the tutoring fee, no questions asked at all. They didn't scold me or admonish me in any way. They said, "This is just too bad, you've been overworked." They made some excuse for me, and they very gladly paid the fee, and that was that, no questions asked. But there was no, with respect to parent-teacher involvement, which is so important nowadays, there was very little of that, very little. I think there were parent-teachers associations, I'm not sure, but if there were, they certainly didn't come to my attention. My parents never attended. I don't think there were any associations. My parents did not attend. The only time my parents attended was when we had the junior prom, and they went to that, just to see how we looked, all dolled up, evening gowns and tuxedos and so on. It was a big occasion then. And then, of course, at commencement. But otherwise, games, football games, basketball games, no. Very little parental involvement, very little at that time. Yet there were no serious problems. Most serious offenses were smoking. If you were caught smoking, I don't know what happened to you, but something happened. Certainly you could not smoke inside the school building in any way, shape or form. There was no smoking room or anything of the kind. Smoking was absolutely forbidden. By and large, it was a polite student body. There were no riots, there were no protests over Cambodia or Vietnam. We just didn't do that. We just went to school and that was it.
Interesting. So you would have, so if you graduated in 1937, say?
1937. The war was imminent in Germany. The war hadn't yet started. Pearl Harbor.
How did you know? I mean, what kind of news was coming over the? Why? I mean, 1937 was
the rise of Hitler. Hitler was beginning.
Right.
I remember in history we had to give, every Monday we had to give an oral report on some news item. And I remember once I had a news item on Hitler, and I mispronounced the name. I called him Hilter. And then I'd never forget the teacher, who was very good, Miss Baker, corrected me and said, "That's Hitler." That's Hitler, Ralph. Oh, Hitler. So, but it was the rise of Hitler. Hitler was beginning, you see, to come, and people were beginning to be worried. Not, still not completely sold on going to war. Charles Lindbergh was still, with his pacifism, was still quite popular. The no involvement move. But no, we were aware of Hitler and the rise of Germany.
Did you I mean, what was the, I guess at that time, I'm curious to know what the impressions were. I mean, now it's easy to say, because of how everything turned out, and in 2020 hindsight, but was there sort of, did you know about Japan and Italy's involvement, or did you have any information about kind of how everything was coming together, or how did you?
Yes, we were aware of Japan. We were very much aware of Japan, and Japan's conquest in China, of Manchuria, changing it to Manchukuo, conquests in the Pacific, and we were very fearful of Japan, Tojo, but more fearful of Hitler than of anyone else. Italy we didn't care about because we knew the Italians didn't amount to anything when it came to war. They had long ago given up fighting with the Roman legions, and they weren't an army or navy or air force to be considered very seriously, although we were concerned about their conquest of Abyssinia, as it was called, later to become Ethiopia. And the fact that they, for the first time, dropped bombs on the poor Ethiopians when the Ethiopians were throwing spears up at the airplanes. It was that primitive. And my grandfather reading the paper about the Italian, you see, Italy conquered Ethiopia, Libya, and what was the other one? The other North African country, Libya and not Morocco, not Algeria. What's the one? And Tunisia. They conquered Tunisia and Libya and Ethiopia in North Africa. And I do remember my grandparents talking about giving up their gold to have it melted down to help support the war, Mussolini's war. I don't know whether they actually did that or not.
They were supportive of the Italians then?
Well, I don't know really. I think they were. I think it was a natural thing to. But and I remember they're talking about Mussolini asking all Italian expatriates to give their gold and have it melted down. Whether they did that or not, I don't know. I rather doubt it. They were not really Italian patriots, as I indicated in my first talk to you. So I don't think so, but I remember they're talking about it. Anyhow, Mussolini made that request, yes, that they give up their gold, meaning the wedding rings and so on.
So while you were in high school, did you have was there any concern as far as if there was going to be a military involvement that, I don't know how imposing the draft for World War I had been, but was there any concern for being dragged into war while you were still in high school? Or?
I don't think so, not in high school. That concern came when we were in college, as I recall. When we had to register with the draft board. I think we had registered with the draft board, I'm sure, when we were 18. So I registered my first year in college. We registered, yes, we were fearful then. And I was very fearful because I was a pacifist. I didn't want to fight. And we wondered when we would be called up for service. So...
But in high school, okay, so in high school then, towards the end of high school, I guess with all this happening in the background, you would have been applying. Was there sort of a standard college application procedure, or was that something that you had to, was it a fairly small percentage of the class that would actually apply and go on to college, and so you had to do it on your own somehow, or
the high school courses were divided. There were several different high school. It was very much like in Germany, I suppose, where there were different tracks. there was a so-called classical course. The classical course would prepare you for college. In the classical course you took Latin and French. That prepared you for college. There was the business course, in which you took typing and stenography, shorthand, and so on, which prepared you for business. That's what my sister took. By and large, the best students took the classical course. Then there was the industrial course, in which case some of your work was in trade school. We also had a trade school downtown where you went to either learn electricity or carpentry or plumbing. So there was the industrial course, and some took that. So you had the 3 different tracks. I should have pointed out also that even in junior high school, everybody was obligated to take some courses in trade school. And I took electricity and carpentry, electricity and machinery, where you had to operate the lathes and make bolts and cut pipes and that sort of thing, machining. I didn't like that, but I liked the electricity actually, how to make connections. To this day I can still make connections and so on, which I learned in trade school. Everybody had to do that in 8th grade. Once a week you had to go to the trade school for that. In high school you didn't have to do it unless you took the industrial track, you see. So 3 tracks: industrial, business, classical. I took the classical. Then to prepare for college you could take extra courses after school, which I did in French especially, to prepare you. There was no student counselor to advise. There is now an elaborate system to advise you on what colleges to apply to and so on. Your best bet was just asking some favorite teacher for advice. The favorite teacher would give it to you, but there were no professional counselors. In my case, it was the Depression. I had no choice but to go to the Teachers College, which was located right in the town, which later became Western Connecticut State University. So I went there, and that's where I met your grandmother. And
did you have to write them for a college application that was of some kind of a standard format, and you would have to send that in?
We had to apply. Then we had a personal interview. Everybody had to be personally interviewed.
But you didn't have. I guess at that point you knew that it was going to be that. Did you? You didn't apply to an assortment of colleges or anything?
I had my mind set on going to Middlebury College up in Vermont because I wanted to be a language teacher. And Middlebury College was the famous college for languages. The only college that gave a Doctor of Modern Language degree called DML, Doctor of Modern Languages. And I especially wanted to teach French, but I couldn't afford it. So I didn't lament it. I just went to the other place, and that was that.
Was there an acceptance? Did you have to be accepted, and you waited by the mailbox for the letter to come? Or?
Yes. But there wasn't much apprehension because you pretty much knew you'd be accepted. So I had good grades. I was an honor student when I graduated from high school, and my grades were good. But the interesting thing, to come to the end of this discussion, all my life I wanted to be a teacher. I never wanted to be anything else. Well, no, I take that back. For a while I wanted to be a priest. But in a way, every Catholic boy wants to be a priest. He goes through that stage. Your great-grandfather, Dr. Kaufman, wanted to be an Episcopal minister at a certain stage in his career. Almost everybody at a certain stage in our generation wanted to be a priest or a minister, but that passed after a year or two. It was not much different from wanting to be a fireman or a policeman when we were little boys, because these were the people you saw in uniform, policemen, firemen. One of the standard questions which you asked little boys in those days was, what do you want to be, a policeman or a fireman? That was the standard question. And later on, when you came in contact with priests who were held in tremendous respect and almost a sense of awe, you wanted to be a priest. So that was a passing phase. I'd say it lasted about a year. But beyond that, all my life I wanted to be a teacher, and I wanted to be a professor, more specifically, rather than a teacher. I didn't want to teach in public school. So I was lucky. I never had to make a career decision. That's what I wanted to be, and that's what I've become, and that's what I've spent my life doing, and it's been very happy. This might be an appropriate place to end because we're at the end of high school now. Do you think?
Yeah. Yeah.
And we can resume. It's nearly 3 o'clock. Next time we can go on to college.
Okay.
Unless you have some questions, you want to ask some questions, but college will be an entirely different dimension, so I'd rather have a separate session for that. But whatever questions you have, I'll be glad to answer.
I'm curious. It seems like typically people will, when they start getting towards, 16, 17 years old and they're still living in their parents' house, sometimes there will be the, tensions that arise between your
Yes.
parent. It's just that instinct to sort of want to move out and be your own man. Did you have any sort of tensions at
No,
home?
it's interesting. As I look back on it, I wonder myself, because you're quite right. At a certain age, it becomes intolerable to live with your parents. Absolutely intolerable. They can't stand you, and you can't stand them. Somehow that didn't happen. I don't know why. I don't know why, really, except...
Was it close quarters there? Did you have enough space, or were you by yourself enough, or did you?
I had my own room, of course. My sister had her bedroom. My mother was a marvelous housekeeper, and extremely orderly, and everything was in order and immaculately kept and the like.
Did they impose a curfew on you, or any
No.
rules or regulations that made you?
No, I could come and go as I pleased. They were wiser, as I look back on it, they were perhaps wiser than I thought at the time. They did not. I could stay out as late as I wanted. I could borrow my father's car whenever it was available. I never resisted.
You didn't have to have a driver's license, or did you have
Oh
to
yes,
have
I had a driver's license from 16 on.
From 16 on, okay.
But in those days I didn't have my own car. But whenever the car was available, all I had to do was ask him. He said yes. Because in high school I went out on dates in the car and would pick up girls at their houses and so on, and then we'd go to movies and the like. So, go ahead.
Did you have anything bad happen, and when you were borrowing the car that you had to hide from your parents, or
No.
the car didn't break down and you had to get it secretly repaired, or anything like that?
No, I was lucky. I was lucky. Nothing like that happened, but you're right, sometimes among other people it did happen. Once or twice they imposed. I remember somebody was giving a New Year's Eve party, and I wanted to go, and my mother wouldn't let me go. She said, no, you can't go out on New Year's Eve. Your place is with your family on New Year's Eve. And I didn't like that, but I obeyed. That's about the only time I can remember whether imposing. The idea of you must be with your family, the obligation to be with your family was constantly drilled into us, and I did resist that. I disliked it intensely sometimes. I didn't want to be with my family, but there was that sense of obligation. You must be with your family. And I usually gave in. I mean, what else could I do except run away from home?
Now, did they give you any kind of allowance, or did you do any sort of housework or yard work where it was your weekly task, or what kinds of responsibilities?
First of all, I earned some money on my own. As I told you, I mowed lawns. In the winter, I shoveled snow. I washed my uncle's car every Saturday. My uncle, the dentist, was very not good to me. Even though the car didn't need washing, I went to his office, picked up his car, washed it, polished it. Polishing was $5. Washing was $1. As I told you, I worked at my grandfather's house, earned some money. I cut Mrs. Davis' lawn. I did odd jobs of that kind, and I earned maybe $5, $6, $7 a week, which was enough pocket. That was quite a bit of pocket money for me. What did I spend it for? Well, after school we'd go to a drugstore and have an ice cream soda. That was our main recreation. After a football or basketball game, we'd stop at what was known as a Texas Wiener place, and have what we would call a hot dog, but they were Texas Wieners. That was our splurging.
Mm.
That was maybe 10 cents.
So
Things of that kind.
You would go to the basketball and football games of the high school?
Yes, I went to those, yeah.
Huh. Did you, you would sit in the stands with friends, and
Yeah.
that was sort of the social gathering?
Yes, that's right, yeah.
What did you think of the actual games? I mean, were you ever interested in the
Yes,
actual
I
sports?
was interested in the games, yeah, and who would win and so on at that time. Later on I lost interest, but in high school I was interested. And I don't remember whether I got an allowance from my parents or not. If I asked them for money if I needed it, they would give it to me. But I think I earned enough. He's coming. William's coming.
Okay.
Tell him to come in, would you please?
All right. Yeah, here I can.
Come in, William. William, I'll tell you what to do.
What's the
Wait till we
wire
turn off
here?
this. I'll tell you what to do with the seed. There are a few bare spots in the lawn.
Mm-hmm.
There's one right out here in front, a small one. And there's one on the other side where they put in the new pipe.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's some grass missing up at that end toward the fence. So scrape it up with the rake, and then put down some topsoil. I've got 2 bags of topsoil over here.
Mm-hmm.
Put down plenty of topsoil, plenty of grass seed, nice and thick,
Mm-hmm.
and then cover it with the topsoil.
All right.
And that's what I want. That's the
Mm-hmm.
grass seed. Okay, thank you, William. Yeah.
All right. So should we? You want to just go ahead and stop there? And
Yeah,
then
let's
we'll
stop
just,
there. This is what I want to work on. My next project is to get all of this in proper order. When I was in college, look, all these are newspaper clippings about me in college. I don't want you to read them now, but just read the headline.
Mm-hmm.
Jeez, what the hell did I know about it at that time? 17 years old. At 17 years old, I'm telling the Rotary Club, sees no dangers.
Be glad it doesn't say sees no danger of you know.
Speaks in
World War II or
Stratford,
something.
yeah.
Talks
was
to
all
women.
over-
There's a good headline.
I was all over the newspaper then, you see. Your grandmother, her betrothal is revealed, as they say. Well, now we get mixed up here into going to Japan, but look, my mess hall was given, 3rd Regiment prizes given to my mess hall, see? This is out of college, of course, but Company A Mess Hall in Building T96, under the supervision of Mess Officer First Lieutenant Ralph Braibanti, won first prize.
Was that in a?
This was in an army newspaper.
Hmm.
Well, this is when we went to Japan. Here we were, on our way to Japan. 206 officers go in coaches on way to Japan.
August 19th, 1945.
Now here I am again, Captain Braibanti. They still use that same picture. But you see all these things?
You were well covered.
Oh yes. Yeah. This was the professor at college who helped me so much. And then I wrote a eulogy about her when she died, see? pays tribute. Criticizes
Be right
MacArthur.
back. I'm just gonna.
Well, that's why I have to go through this, because it's all mixed up. Now here you've got Newsweek magazine. You see Newsweek magazine with my picture in Newsweek about starting a course in Japan at Duke. There I was wearing a bow tie. That was in my bow tie phase. I don't know who the woman was. She was a student of mine. Then all my Japanese students here. But somehow we got away from college. Here I am. Can you tell which one of these is me? This is the Villa Cervelloni in Italy.
There you are.
Right, you got it. You got it right. Here I am here with your grandmother. Have you ever seen this picture?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you've seen that, Joe. Most of these that you've seen.
I've seen some. No, I haven't seen most of them, but that one.
Well, it goes beyond, but then here's another one. Here, this is a... We'll get into some of this stuff next time. See, all of this is college stuff. I was president of the forum, so I introduced all these speakers to George Page. I had tremendous experience in college. Two receiving lines. That's how what a local paper will do. There were two receiving lines here, and the receiving line will be Ralph Braibanti, president of the forum, Sir George Page, guest speaker, and so on. And the second receiving line will be these other people.
So when did you actually were you making a scrapbook like this as you?
Yes, I was, yeah, at the time. This, you can see this is quite old. 50 years old. It's not all about me, just... Now I've got to rearrange all of this and put it in chronological order. College and after college in Japan and so on. That's my next big job. Mother and I. Hotel Pennsylvania banquet. We used to do that. We just get on the train and go. Only 50 minutes away.
Yeah, that'd be good. It'll definitely be interesting to get start going into the college years.
You talk about Hitler. Here's this woman who speaks, Hitlerism is not a new idea. Delivers a talk on the German situation. I introduced her. I presided at that. Mrs. Vance cautioned that, understanding the case to say that Hitler is anything less than a remarkable man, huh? Look, although he writes bad German and his ideas are half-baked, he is a very remarkable man. Well, that's true.